Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. My name is Chris the High Guy Jacobs, and today we're taking a look at part 3 of our 3-part deep dive into the ranged heroes in Doomsday Last Survivor. We've gone through Sophie, Lynn, Jack, Chun, Julia, Bard, Nora, and Johnny, leaving only the 4 left that I would put into the garrison position. Now, understand again with this little bit of a precursor, do these heroes only work in garrison? No. They will have flexibility. You can put them in other positions. You can put Lewis in the field, for example. Heck, I've seen Lewis run with a Dut and do infantry and still do well. So there is tons of flexibility. But once you read these characters' kits, once we read through these heroes' kits, you'll understand why they shine the best in garrison. Apart from Nakano, she simply gets relegated to this list because there's too many good field battle heroes to choose from, and she won't be running rallies. So, that being said, let's deep dive into the 4 remaining heroes that we have to look at. The first one being Ethan, the Shadow Hitman. Now, Ethan is a character that he's available only during Top Commander. He was just released, so he's brand new. We're still looking at what the influence of what he's going to be able to do inside the garrison. But obviously the problem with this is that we're talking about ranged garrison. And ranged garrison doesn't really do well overall, simply because ranged is the weakest. They take the most amount of damage, which means that they're not going to be a tanky garrison by any stretch. They're going to deal a lot of damage, but they're not going to have the sustainability that you're going to get from Chasey in the Riders or Ragaro Riven in the infantry side of things, which just simply means that garrison isn't going to happen as much as a ranged main. Typically, you're going to be seeing more running rallies and things like that, fighting in the field, dealing more damage that way, okay? However, these heroes do work really well inside. They do work well inside of what they do the best, and Ethan with his super weapon obviously is going to start bringing a little bit more of that. So let's start talking about it, and then we'll get a good comparison when we get them all awakened. First and foremost, Death Casket is a passive skill once you get it on a super weapon, where basic attacks have a 25% to deal damage to the current target at a factor of 2,750 and gain 1 stack of gunfire. If garrisoned, gain 2 stack of gunfire instead. This effect can be triggered only once in 4 seconds. So, once in 4 seconds, and 25% chance means once every 4 seconds, you're going to get that chance to deal, to gain 2 gunfire. Now, what are gunfire stacks? Well, we'll go through his kit and we'll explain why those are important. Just understand that while garrisoned, I mean, again, yes, you can be used outside to gain those gunfire stacks outside of battle, but when he's garrisoned, he's gaining twice as many gunfire stacks, which, as we'll see, is quite important. Okay. His first skill, All Shots Fired, is a rage skill requiring 1,000. We're dealing damage up to 3 enemies at a factor of 13,500 in a fan-shaped area in front. Damage taken by each enemy reduces by 15% for each additional enemy target. Very typical AoE kind of step down there. However, for every enemy target hit, gain 1 stack of gunfire. If garrisoned, for every enemy target hit, gain 2 stacks of gunfire instead. For every 10 stacks of gunfire gained, increases ranged squad attack by 10%. So you really want to stack gunfire stacks very, very quickly. Okay? So if you're in a rally, or if you're garrison, for example, or a multi-garrison, for example, or a garrison of a target of a multi-rally target, you're going to be generating gunfire stacks very, very quickly, and increasing your ranged squad attack by 10% for every 10 stacks that you gain. Okay? And again, 13,500 is nothing to scoff at. That's right around where we're talking about for decent damage. This is still a brand new hero, right? So these damage numbers are early. Next, we've got Gunfight Tactics as a passive skill, increasing range squad attack by 42%. Counter attacks have a 20% chance to grant 1 stack of gunfire. So again, more gunfire stacks. We want to stack it as fast as we can. In garrison is how we do it. Next, we've got Tactical Deployment. Increases range squad HP by 36% and reduces squad skill damage taken by 13% when garrisoned. Percent, not percent. So not only are we 36% healthier in HP, but we're also taking 13% less skill damage when garrisoned. Now, this entire skill is connected to when he's garrisoned. So until you have him awakened and transcended and his super weapon awakened, he really is specific to Garrison. Okay? Next, we've got Hunter Spirit, where we're going to increase the range defense now by 38%. If Garrison reduces all damage taken by 10% for 1 minute after entering battle. Now, you may say 1 minute is not a long time. And you're right. In some of these battles that we've seen where the infantry is a garrison, I've seen some rallies go on for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, no lies. Okay? However, with a ranged garrison, they're much shorter, doing way more damage, right? So that's the kind of trade-off that you're doing. So if you think about it, these ones are gonna average a lot shorter of a time, and a 10% reduction for 1 minute after the whole battle starts gives you the best chance at getting ahead on those garrisons. Okay? So this could in theory be, I mean, you could have some rallies going for only a couple of minutes. You could have some rallies going for 10 minutes. So even 10% of the time having a 10% reduction is pretty good. Okay? And then lastly, once you have them awakened, you're getting a new skill, Killer Instinct, which is going to increase the damage of AoE skills by 18%. And then at 30 stacks of gunfire, remove all gunfire stacks and deal damage up to 3 enemies in a circular area, AoE, at 13,500. So not only are we getting increased damage of AoE skills by 18%, and his factor at 13,500 being 13,500, both of them being AoE, we're talking about a decent amount of damage going out. And that's the whole purpose, right? Deal as much damage as you can. But 42% squad attack, 36% squad HP, 38% squad defense. These numbers for ranged are pretty good. Fuck that. Pardon my French. They're really good. Which means when you're actually talking about it, this makes them much tankier in a garrison position. Not nearly as tanky as your infantry or what have you, but still going to be dealing pretty good inside the garrison position. And then once you have him awakened, right? Once you have him fully transcended and once you have him fully awakened, we start to see some real damage numbers. 14,750. We see for enemy target hit, gain a stack of gunfire. Also recover self HP by 2,000 and further increases the heal factor by an additional 50 per gunfire stack. So you're going to deal 14,000, heal by 2,000, and then an additional 50 per gunfire stack. And if you've got 30 times 50 is an extra 1,500. Now your heal factor is 3,500 before it resets. And if you're garrisoned, deals damage to 4 enemies instead and gains 2 stacks of gunfire for every enemy hit, which means that every skill you could be hitting, especially if you're being targeted by multiples, up to 8 stacks of gunfire per skill. Still getting that 10 stacks of gunfire gain, increasing the squad attack by 10%. So not only are we now getting, and then check this, increased range squad attack by 49%. So we're going from 42% with counterattacks having a 20% chance to granting 1 gunfire stack to 49% with counterattacks having a 30% chance, right? So an additional 7% and additional 10% to stacking gunfire. Here we go from 36% HP and 13% damage reduction when garrisoned to a flat 43% HP and then a garrison of 17% when garrisoned. So this is where he starts to see a little bit of flexibility where you can see him in the field a little bit, right? He's not getting the garrison here, the 4 enemies. He's only getting 3, and he's not getting the double stacks. But he's got a flat 49% attack, a flat 43% HP, right? And then a flat 45% defense. So you only see him in the field as well. If garrison reduces all damage taken by 15% for 2 minutes after entering battle. So we're not only seeing this increase as well, but we're going from 38 and a reduction of 10% for 1 minute to 45 with a reduction of 15 for 2 minutes. So that's a huge increase once he's awakened. right? And then his transcendent skill just means that he's even dealing more, right? So increases that by 27%. At 30 stacks, you'll remove all gunfire and deal 14. And then you have that heal factor of an additional 40,000. If Garrison reduces the amount of stacks required to 25. So now we're triggering it more often. So tons of damage going out, tons of attack, tons of HP, tons of defense. So this is what I'm saying. He might still do well inside of the ranged Garrison position. But you got to get him awakened, transcended, and his super weapon awakened as well. Right? In order for him to be totally usable. Which costs a lot of fragments, costs a lot of time, costs a lot of nodes. Right? Power cores, pardon me. However, nothing to scoff at. Totally a great character. Next, we're going to look at Lewis. Now, Lewis is probably... He probably puts Julia on her toes in regards to one of the heroes that's got the most amount of flexibility. Because Lewis is, again, very old. He's one of the old original heroes. But he could be used in so many different places. I've seen him in Garrison. I've seen him run rallies. I've seen him, like I said, I've seen him with, like, co-leading a line with a Dut as a leader, dealing a ton of damage in an infantry line. So there's tons of capabilities for him to be used. But he is a Garrison hero. His skills play best to Garrison. And for the selection that we have, again, specifically because Garrison doesn't happen very much in the ranged position, this is still where he shines the best. Now, granted, he also has a skin, don't forget. So we'll talk about that as well. Just prepare to be a little bit underwhelmed. Okay? So first and foremost, he's bringing skills. He's bringing ranged squad attack, or ranged squad for the talents. And his first skill is going to be dealing 1,000 damage up to 5 enemy targets. Each damage taken by each enemy squad is reduced by 15% for each additional target's hit. So the first target's going to hit for 10,000. The last target, he gets hit for like a wet noodle. But that's not the point. You're doing it up to 5 enemy squads. Okay? Even if you do the calculations, so you do 18... I mean, so what? 15,000 less, so 18, 5... 16, so 6 is 24. I mean, you're still doing 30,000 damage in a group. You know what I mean? Like, that's a lot. Okay. Now we've got increasing skill damage by 30%. So 13,000, right? Increasing skill damage by 30%. Increases the HP of ranged squads by 10% when garrisoning. And of course, 10% for HP is a pretty decent one. It's not as good as, you know, Ethan's 48% or 49% or whatever it is. But when garrisoning, you're getting that extra additional 10%, which is important. But an additional 30% to skill damage, that's kind of why he works really well. Because you can put him with a Dut, for example, and a Dut's going to deal more, and then he's going to deal more as well. A Dut also, you know what I mean, benefiting from, you know, from all of that. So, I mean, there's lots of play, lots of flexibility. He's got a flat 30% increase to range squad attack in Deadly Beat. And then Sonata of Sorrow is going to be generating additional 25 when using basic attack. So every so squads gain an additional 25 rage when using basic attacks. So every basic attack, you're doing an additional 25 rage. So you're generating a ton of rage, which is not specific to any heroes or any types of troops. This one is specific to ranged. Nice 30%. 30% skill damage. Increase 10% when garrisoning. And then a ton of AoE damage. Once he's awakened, his damage goes up. Now we're talking 12,000 instead. And plus 30%, you know, added onto the skills that he already adds. Makes for a lot of AoE damage. Okay? Lots of AoE damage. Now, when we look at his skin, we start to see some of the things that get changed. 2 of them don't get touched. Okay? 2 of them don't get touched. That's the Rage Regeneration and Massacre Concerto. So the HP and skill damage don't get touched. However, his main one does. So his main one goes from a damage factor of 12,000 once he's awakened. Because remember, you have to have him awakened. Well, you don't have to have him awakened, but If you don't have him awakened, you're dealing 11,000. There's also a 90% chance to enter the ferocious state for 3 seconds, where you have an increased squad attack by 10% and deals 10% more damage to squad with less than 20% of squad size. So, super underwhelming. Okay, it's a 90% chance, right? When it's fully leveled, you're doing 11,000 damage with a 90% chance to enter a ferocious state. Now, during a ferocious state, you're increasing your squad attack by 10% and deals 10% more damage to squads with less than 20% of squad size. So yes, you're getting this additional 10%, which is great. You're going to, 90% of the time get an additional 10% attack. But you've only got a 10%, 20%, or you're only dealing 10% more damage with less than 20%. So you honestly, like, need him in garrison or maybe in rally when a lot of the fight happens at under 30%, under 20%. Right? Which means that he's moving out of garrison now and putting into rally, which doesn't necessarily work with his kit, because his kit wants him to be garrisoned, right? That's what the second ability is. Increasing that 10% HP only when he's garrisoning. Now we've got this one here. So here we're going to have increase of 30% for his attack, which is the same here. But now when in a ferocious state, so 90% of the time, each basic attack has a 40% chance to heal at a factor of 1,000. Right? So damage taken by each enemy squad okay. So every time he triggers, there's a 90% chance to enter ferocious state. So every time he triggers, we've got a 90% chance to start healing as well. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's only healing, and healing isn't great. But it's consistent. Right? So you'll end up with a couple of heals, adds for some longevity. But it's when he awakens that you start to see where it really happens. Because when he awakens, now we see 13,000 damage, so it really starts to square up. And it's a guaranteed ferocious state. It's not a 90%, it's a guaranteed. So, again, is it worth the money that it costs to get the Midnight Baron? In my opinion, no. It's probably the most underwhelming skin in the game. So far, but there's only 3. But it does make him a little bit more usable. It gives him a little bit more heals, a little bit more sustainability. But again, depends on where you want to use him. You can use him in the field. You can use him in a rally. You can use him in garrison. He's kind of can play all over the place. But he is getting a little bit outdated now when you have the addition of all the new heroes. Sophie, Lynn, Jack now. All these other ones that are coming out. Okay? So those are the 2 special ones for garrison. Now we're going to look at Jacob. Our boy Jacob. Not to be confused with Johnny. This is Jacob, the Eagle Hunter. And this is where we're going to start to see him bring the defense tree. So he would be the one, if you're going to lead with a hero in the defensive side to add that tank factor, it's going to be him with his defensive tree. It does mean that you're going to have less rage skills. So you do want to pair him with someone who's going to, generate a decent amount of rage. Someone like Lewis, who's going to have that additional rage generation. But this is where you're going to start to see some of that tank. So that defensive skill tree and the range squad skill tree. Now his first one's going to be dealing 12,000. It's called Birds of Prey. It's 1,000 rage. Deals 12,500 to up to 3 targets. Increasing own counter damage by 23%. Okay? So again, specifically when he's in garrison, you're going to be dealing a lot of counter damage. So he increases your counter damage by 23% for 3 seconds. Next, we've got this one here where we're increasing. We've got Earth Champion. Passive skill increasing range squad HP by 20% and increases all damage dealt by 7.5% when garrisoning. So when garrisoning, he's going to have additional HP and a whole ton of additional damage. Right? And 7.5% is flat damage. Okay? So Dance with the Eagle is his next skill, dealing damage to up to 3 nearby enemy squads at a factor of 2,000 every 8 seconds. If garrisoning, also reduces the attack of those squads by 17% for 2 seconds. So guaranteed every 8 seconds, you're dealing an extra 2,000 damage in another AoE. So if you pair him with Ethan, for example, remember we just talked about Ethan today. Here's a prime example of a decent pairing, right? Jacob and Ethan Oh, I don't have Ethan yet. Jacob and Ethan are going to work well. I mean, they work well together, especially with all the AoE, and then his bonus damage to AoE skills. So I could see Jacob and Ethan being actually a pretty defensive line. Okay. Next, we've got Son of the Wind. Increases all damage by 16% if the remaining squad size is below 50%. Increase all damage to 20% if the remaining squad size is less than 30%. So that's, I mean, flat increases are great. Increase in squad damage by 7.5%. Increase in all damage by 20%. I mean, these are huge. Granted, these only come in when you're halfway through, but dealing 12,500 damage, plus increasing your counter damage, plus increasing your overall damage. I mean, you're going to be pumping that pretty quickly. And you pair that with Ethan, for example. You pair that with Lewis, for example, who's dealing a ton of damage themselves. And they're literally just pumping out damage. And they're decently tanky in the process. Granted, not as tanky as Chasey, and not as tanky as Riven and Raguro. But if you're a ranged main and you need some defense for your shelter, for example, that's what I would be looking at. Jacob and Ethan for sure. Now, once he gets awakened, his damage wakens up a little bit. So now we go to 13,750 in a fan-shaped area in front, and increasing that own damage by 28% for 3 seconds. Increasing their counter damage by 28%. Right? So this is going to help with multi-target garrisons, for example, and things like that, where you're going to be dealing out more counter damage. So altogether, I mean, his damage is pretty good. 13,750 is right up where it needs to be. His damage is overall bonus damage to remaining squads. Additional damage here. Attack reduction of 17. I mean, so he makes things tankier, counter damage. So he makes things hit, and because he's got the defense tree, right, he makes things much tankier in battle. Pair him with Ethan, that's a really good pairing. Pair him with Lewis, really good pairing, right? Any of those situations are going to work for Jacob. Now, lastly, let's look at the one hero, which, in my opinion, she's kind of just fallen to this position. It's not that she works well in Garrison. Don't get me wrong by any stretch. She would probably be a field battle hero, but it's literally because she's arguably one of the worst, like, just useless heroes. Unfortunately, everything that she does is done better by other heroes, right? So, like, yes, she has the skills tree. Yes, she's got the range squad tree, right? Yes, she brings, you know, stuff that'll benefit her in the field battles. But there's just, like, Sophie does it better. Lynn does it better. Jack does it better. Julia does it better. Any of those choices. Chun does it better, for Christ's sakes. So any of those choices are better than Nakano. Even though she's free, she's one of those heroes where I'm like, don't invest the resources. Like, even in my position, I don't have her awakened. I don't have her done anything more than, 40 and what the game has given me. Okay? But let's go through her anyways, and you can make your own decision. Ghost Dancer Nakano Maya. Nakano Maya. Man, I love killing these names. You know that was perfect pronunciation, right? So... All right, first and foremost, special technique retribution requiring 1,000 rage. Deals 8,000 damage to the enemy and increases squad attack by 24% for 3 seconds. So only 8,000 damage, right? Very, very low damage. Next, increases squad attack by 15% and squad travel speed by 15%. Again, very low. We're only talking about 15% to your attack. When you've got some others doing 49%, 15 is pittance. And this is special technique Eagle Dance. Now we've got special technique Storm Array. Squad's basic attacks have a 10% chance to deal an additional 4,000 damage to the target. It's only 10%, so 1 every 10 seconds is going to be an additional 4,000 damage. And then lastly, when squad HP is lower than 50%, increases range squad attack by 26% and travel speed by 18%. So when you're chasing in the field, right? So again, she'll play in the field. That's where she wants to be. But most of her benefits and bonuses are too locked behind stuff and the trigger times just aren't great. So a low percent of attack, low percent of a travel speed, once in 10% chance is not very good. Yes, you get this, but that's only when they're lower than 50%. You have to keep up. You know, you're not good for chasing other enemy troops in the field. And then once you have once you have her awakened, her special technique, Kaya, basically just deals extra damage to infantry only at 10%. So just outdated, old. Unfortunately, she's free. You think she's good, but she's not. She gets relegated to Garrison just because there's so many other better choices for field battle and so many better choices for rally. You'll probably never even use Nakano. Hell, I've never used her, so I don't think you will. But this is where she gets relegated to on the Garrison list. But that's it, folks. That's all of the heroes. We have now gone through all of the ranged, all of the riders, all of the infantry. We've gone through every single of the legendary heroes. We haven't talked about all of the elite heroes because, in my opinion, the only ones to mention are the ones that I've already gone through. In the ranged category, there really aren't any ranged heroes that I would mention honorably that are elite, just because Nakano is free and Nora is free, and those would be the only two honorable mentions that would get anything because they are free. But that being said, guys, if you like what you saw, go ahead and hit the comment section, hit the like comments, or hit the like button, subscribe, fill out the notification bell. If there's anything you disagree with, go ahead and throw it down in the comments. Let's start a conversation. That's what we're here for. And if there's anything else you want to see, go ahead and throw that in the comments as well. I'm always looking for new ideas. Other than that, folks, love, peace, chicken grease, and until next time, stay lifted.